This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. If it's true that electric vehicles were buzzing around Vancouver streets about a century ago, and believe me, it is true, we will show you, then what happened? Why did they disappear? Or were they disappeared? Was it the big oil companies? The plot gets downright viscous. And if electric vehicles are back, and they are back big time, look, TELUS just put up, or is about to put up, 3 poles on Beach Avenue where you can plug in and renew, among other things, then will, in fact, a world of electric vehicles be more harmful in the long run to the environment than all the internal combustion engines combined? Big questions, big guy to answer. John Stonier from Signature Renewables, Inc. Yes. John, thanks for joining us. So, how is it even that we had these vehicles 100 years ago?
Well, electric technology was the leading technology of the late 1800s.
Yes.
Basically evolving from the big dot-com boom of the 1890s as bicycles, and bicycles moved into bicycle people who made money there, moved into electric vehicles. It was the next major technology, and it was much more advanced than internal combustion engines. Internal combustion engines in the late 1890s were unreliable. They hadn't really invented the radiator, so they would get overheated, and gas was really, the standards for gas were all over the place. So it wasn't all that great. You had to crank your car, and the crank would sometimes kick back at you, either break your arm or break your shoulder blade or something.
Right.
So it was really Wild West in the internal combustion engine at the end of the 1890s. And there was about 200 car companies producing electric cars at the time, and they were simply horse-drawn carts that they'd motorized. Basically, that's what they started out with, and then it started to progress.
But what were they running off? Some kind of
they had the secondary battery cell, the lead-acid battery had been invented by Gaston Plant in 1856, and essentially that technology is essentially what's in your regular car today to start your car and to run your lights and that sort of thing. That lead-acid battery technology has been pretty solid for 150 years, but it also hasn't progressed much. But back in those days, the requirements for a car at those days were you'd like to get across town, so if you could have 25 miles range, that would be superb. If you could go 25 miles an hour, you're outpassing the horse and buggies. And the other motor cars were only going about the same speed at the time. There was 3 technologies. There was steam, there was electric, and there was gasoline and diesel, the internal combustion engine. And they were all vying for who was going to take the lead around 1899.
Okay, so then it wasn't just Henry Ford. I mean, certainly Shell and whatever Chevron was called in those days.
Standard Oil.
Standard Oil must have had a lot to do with this.
Well, actually, it's pretty straightforward. If you look at the electrification of cities back then, the electrification was in the cities, but not in the rural areas. Vancouver had, I believe, the first dam was built in 1905, and 1912, Stave Falls was built. A number of electric dams, so the electricity was here in the city. And electric vehicles were here. So we had lots of electric vehicles on Carroll Street. The BC Electric Light Company had them. They actually used electric trucks to go light the gas lamps on the street. So it was...
That's funny.
It was very interesting at the time. But the economics of electric cars back then were... And gasoline engines were changing. They were getting better. In 1912, Cadillac put their first electric starter into their cars. So automatically now you could start the car without having to crank it.
Huge difference.
And the Standard Oil Company built stations to supply gas across North America. So they actually beat the electric utilities to install electric lighting throughout So electric networks were not built until well after gasoline. But the economics were very simple. Back in 1912, the price of electricity in Vancouver was 33 cents a kilowatt hour. 33 cents in those days.
That's amazing.
The price of gasoline was 5 cents a gallon. 5 cents a gallon. So now we roll forward to today. It's 10 cents a 10 cents a kilowatt hour and about $7 a gallon for gasoline.
And then there must have been another huge leap right after the Second World War. I mean, all this energy going into the war machinery and so on, which was necessary at the time. And then suddenly it was Dinah Shore time, and it was see the USA in your Chevrolet.
Absolutely.
And everybody had a convertible, and everybody was enjoying the open road. And the most popular TV show of the 50s or the 60s was Route 66.
Absolutely.
And everybody could project into that fantasy.
Yes, electric cars basically lost the war of the three technologies in about the late teens, and by the early 20s they were virtually gone, and they didn't reappear until the Arab oil embargo of 1973. There was a brief interest in electric cars. There was a couple cars in the States that were built. The post office built some electric Jeeps for post office deliveries, and there was a company called the Enfield in England that made a car. BC Hydro bought 2 of them back in 1975.
The Enfield.
The Enfield.
Not to be confused with the rifle.
No, this was
Different
sort of like a
folks.
bubble car. It looked like an
yeah.
AMC Pacer almost.
Yeah,
It was quite interesting. But of course, electric car, lead acid batteries, it wasn't enough technology to win over the
And also,
automotive
cars
industry.
moved from being almost armored trucks, they were very heavy things, to the light technology of today, whatever they're made of. I don't know what they're made of.
They're still much better. I mean, aerodynamics, styling, and everything is composite materials has brought cars a long way. But they're still 3,500-pound vehicles. There's a lot we can take out of cars to make them more efficient.
Really?
Electricity is the one thing that really makes cars efficient.
Before you go there, what are some of the other things we could take out of cars to make them more efficient?
They're using composite materials like the Rocky Mountain Institute built a hypercar a few years ago, which uses composite panels that take half the weight out. So you're not having steel, you have composite. It's stronger than steel, it's more durable. You can take a sledgehammer to it, it bounces right back. So that just increases the longevity.
So what's our problem? Why aren't we doing more of that?
Well, I think it's the same reason why electric cars were sort of hard to like, who killed the electric car? And
Well, exactly, because you know, I sent you this link of this PowerPoint, and you said you've seen things like that for the years, and it's kind of a conspiracy theory PowerPoint about the oil companies and others just killing electric cars. Governments picking up electric cars by the dozens and destroying them.
Yeah, well, I think conspiracy is very dramatic, but I think there's some really sort of non-dramatic explananes why electric cars didn't come in. And one of them was, I think, just because executives of the auto companies are very hard to move. They're dyed-in-the-wool, internal combustion guys. It's hard to move to new technology. It's something they don't understand. But I think the bigger picture is people like me who are chartered accountants and financial guys. They're saying, hey, think about the business model here. You've got a car right now that lasts about 10 years and it's pretty well gone. The mechanical liability that builds in that car makes it valueless in about 10 years if you're actively using the car. If you were to go to electric, you're going to have a car that never breaks down, that the brakes last 3 times as long because you use regenerative braking instead of friction braking, has less parts to manufacture it. Basically, they're going to last 3 to 4 times as long. There's nothing stopping an electric car from lasting 30, 40, 50 years. At the Vancouver Electric Vehicle Association, they have a 1912 Detroit Electric. It's a 100-year-old car. It came to BC 100 years ago. And it still drives today exactly like it did to spec when it rolled off the line on October 9th, 1912.
This may not be useful for a conversation, but I'm interested. I'm fascinated. How do regenerative brakes work? I understand friction brakes.
Okay, so regenerative braking is fairly easy. A motor is used to, you put electricity in from the battery and it creates torque and pushes the wheels. So when you want to brake, you just reverse that process. So you start putting, you allow the motor to act as a generator. That creates torque, reverse torque on the wheels, slows, brakes the car, and energy flows back into the battery. So not only do you reduce the amount of brake dust off your brake pads,
but you're
also recovering that energy you just used to push yourself to speed in the first place.
That's wild.
So you recover, you don't recover everything, but you might recover, 20, 30% of that energy, but it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference on your car. You don't have to wash your car as much because your front tires don't get dirty.
Okay, now look, here's a piece as recently as June 8th in the Sun. Saving money in the planet not guaranteed. Often costly vehicles, effect on greenhouse emissions and so on, depends on the power produced. Let's save the power issue for a little later. Let's just look at the costs. At the moment, this article is one that says electric vehicles are pricey. True, not true?
Yeah, it's true right now. They're pricey to buy.
Yes.
The cost of purchase is high.
Yes.
But in fact, if you actually crunch the numbers, and I've not an academic study, but just in my own experience and looking at the cost of ownership, the total cost of ownership is much less. There's 3 factors that create cost for owners. First, well, 4. Let's say purchase price of the car.
Right.
And then it's operating cost.
Yep.
Fuel, energy. Well, electric car is about 1/8 the amount of cost. So it's going to cost me for my electric car maybe $300 a year for electricity, as opposed to, $3,000 for
Yes.
a premium fueled sports car that I have. That's one. So energy costs are much less. Maintenance costs, again, we talked about regenerative braking, protecting the brakes, and there's no moving parts to break down. An internal combustion engine has 600 odd parts, machined, lubricated, cooled, assembled. It's a very complex piece of machinery. Motors have one moving part, so they're much cheaper to build. They will be. And then the third aspect is the aspect that the auto industry really doesn't want to talk about.
Which is?
Depreciation.
Ah.
It's that fact when you drive that BMW off the lot, it instantly removes $10,000 off the price of that car.
Whereas with an EV, it doesn't.
Exactly. Well, it does a lot less because if you have a car that's going to last 30 to 40, 50 years, and it doesn't have this building liability of mechanical problems.
And you buy it 5 years old, it's still pretty good.
It's going to have a much higher resale value.
Just in terms of the cosmetics and in terms of being user-friendly, do the designers of electric vehicles make a point of making them pretty familiar so that, there's a steering wheel and there's a brake and there's a so-called gas pedal or something pedal, whereas really if they wanted to, it could look completely different?
Yeah. They could, and they are making the cars different,
Yes.
but the driving experience, the driving feel is the same. Every car today, you pretty well push a button to start it. It used to be a key, but you push a button. It comes on, it lights up, full instrumentation, tells you everything. When you drive the wheel just like you did, you push the brakes just like you would.
Does
you hit the accelerator.
Does it tell you how much energy I have left?
It
Like
will
a
give
gas
you
gauge?
a lot more. Electric cars have the potential to be much more of a gadget-oriented. Think about this. Your teenage son comes to you, Dad, can I borrow the car Friday night? I was, oh, sure, I'll let you use that. Now, let me just get my smartphone out and I'll dial in, put it into teenager mode.
Yeah, okay. We got to take a break. John Stonier is our guest from Signature Renewables. And we're just going to take a little breather and come back and talk some more about electric cars and whether or not they really work and if you should start investing in one. Just a reminder, you can go to davidberner.com and send your comments or questions. And of course, we want to give a moment to the nice folks who help support us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Back in a minute.
This program has been made possible in part by the following sponsors. The Vancouver Courier newspaper. KCM Wealth Management. The Trial Lawyers Association of BC.
Having a late breakfast this morning with my son on a late sort of Father's Day breakfast. And while we're eating, I see this lady in a big black truck driving along 7th Avenue, texting. So how safe could you be in an electric scooter or a bicycle or something? It's way too spooky a world. John Stonier is our guest. We're talking about electric vehicles, and John is the key man at Signature Renewables. So let's talk about the electric grid. I have this concern. I know that we've got the worst conditions imaginable already with smog and carbon poisoning and so on, but I don't believe that electric vehicles are some kind of free ride. Sooner or later, if enough people soup up with electric vehicles, we're going to be paying some price on the grid, right? I mean, we're going to have more electrical possibilities.
Sure. I view the grid as, right now, in BC, BC Hydro has estimated that if every car in the province was converted to electric, the increase in electricity demand and energy demand would be about 18% overall. It's not that significant.
You're kidding.
You have to remember that electric cars use 1/4 of the equivalent energy to do the same thing because they're 4 times more efficient at creating energy into torque.
Okay.
So there's a lower amount of energy required to run them. That's the first thing.
Oh, well, first of all, I didn't know that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
They're 80% efficient in creating electrical energy into wheel torque.
Yes.
As opposed to, say, 20% efficient for an internal combustion
yes.
engine to take fuel from the pump and put it in. And that includes the upstream inefficiencies.
Okay. So you're saying 18% is the only effect it would have. Is that a livable percentage for BC Hydro?
I think there's a lot of waste in our system right now. We squander a lot of electricity. If you go to any condo development here and look at the hallways, those lights are on 24/7. The parkade lights are on 24/7. There's a lot of extra waste.
I just sold my house last summer, bought a flat in a building which I love, and just as I was moving in, our building, which is a co-op, made a wonderful choice, and they replaced the always-on fluorescence in the garage with the obvious system. When someone appears, they go on.
Absolutely. I did a study on a condo in Kitsilano a few years ago.
Yes.
And if you did that very scenario and
Yes.
put the occupancy sensors,
Yes.
it was the one that I studied had 150 cars in it.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
calculated
wow.
that you could basically power a 20,000 kilometer per year car. 1/3 of the cars in that parkade could be powered by the savings from lighting in the parkade alone. So there's lots of opportunities.
How would you live without permanent lighting in the hallways? I'm trying to picture this.
Oh, you only turn them on when you're there. It's very common in Europe. You go to any European building and you'll
That's
see
true,
the lights
you're right.
turn on as you go down the hall, and then they turn off when you go.
Yeah. Okay. So what's available today, and how good is it in your estimation? You and I talked before the show about the Prius. You've had a happy experience. A close friend of mine had an unhappy experience, got rid of it after 6 months,
Sure.
and bought a Beamer.
Well, it depends what you're looking for. Electrification of vehicles makes the life last a lot longer. In the case of the Prius, which is a gas-electric hybrid,
Yes.
the taxi fleets love them.
Yeah. Well.
They drive those cars 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
They save about $700 a month in gas bills.
Yes.
The return on investment there is huge. They get 3 times the brake life. Their maintenance costs are long.
Taxis are always getting new brakes.
Absolutely,
Yes.
and they don't rebuild the engines until they hit 900,000 kilometers. Toyota came to Vancouver and bought
Yes.
the first taxis that were in the first hybrids that were in the taxi fleet, and they took them back to
Yes.
Japan to take them apart to see what was going on. And now any taxi driver in the city knows that if you want to have the best value, a Prius is the way to go.
But the one thing I couldn't figure out about that doesn't mesh for me with what you're saying. I believe you, but my experience of driving my friend's Prius is that it was dangerous in one situation. It had no pickup, so that if you're in electric mode and you want to change lanes, you can't zip.
Well, it's not built as an electric car. It's built as a hybrid to
Yes.
support an internal combustion engine to make that internal combustion engine last longer and
Right.
have more fuel efficiency. Electric cars, pure electric cars, have some real gusto to them.
Oh, really?
They have off-the-line performance that you can't match. The Tesla Roadster, for instance, is probably the premium car right now, but it's going to be supplanted very soon with new models.
The Tesla Roadster is an EV.
It's a completely. It's actually a Lotus Elise that was converted by Tesla into electric car. It goes 0 to 60 in 3.7 seconds, which basically takes out virtually every power car, muscle car that's an internal combustion engine. There's virtually nothing that can stop it.
That's particularly interesting because you said earlier, you talked about your family Prius, but you also have this jazzy sports car.
I did a conversion.
Yeah.
I converted a Porsche.
Well, into an EV.
Yes.
Oh, because I was going to ask you about, certainly EVs seem more environmentally friendly and more efficient and all that jazz, and they're very green. But what about that monster child within us who really wants to be Bond, James Bond?
Well, if you've driven a Tesla, which is engineered to be fast, they actually put a G meter in the console, so you can see the G-force acceleration.
Get out.
And it measures the peak that you did in the last acceleration. And I've been in Teslas that have gone 0.65 Gs, and I don't think that's the top.
I'm sorry, but it sounds to me like a New Yorker cartoon. You can see a guy coming in and saying to his wife, "Baby, I just did 5.6 Gs."
It's an incredible feeling to be in that kind of acceleration, because there just is nothing like it in the internal combustion engine world.
Let me ask you an odd question about the Tesla itself. There must be a company now somewhere on Earth called Tesla Inc. or something?
Absolutely. Silicon Valley, it's the premier upstart electric car company.
So because Tesla is such Nicholas Tesla was such an amazing, we can't do 2 hours about him, but such an amazing story about such a genius who ended up broke and so on. Did Tesla Inc. have to buy his name from an estate or something?
I don't know that side of the deal.
Okay.
I'm sure they made some arrangements to cover their IP.
Okay, because it's a name that now is like folkloric, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So we've got this Roadster, and what else have we got? What have we got on the market? What if I wanted to walk out of the studio and buy something?
You'd go to a Nissan Leaf, a Mitsubishi i-MiEV. You'd go to, if you wanted a supercar hybrid, you'd go to a Fisker Karma. The dealership was opened up a couple months ago here in Vancouver, and I understand sales are brisk.
Wow.
They've done very well here in Vancouver. You can buy Chevy Volt, Ford Focus. It's interesting, though, for Detroit on how they've located.
They're
there's 100 years
putzking around with their sales, aren't
there's
they?
100 years of history in the automotive business where they've always put their latest technology into their top-of-the-line cars.
Yes.
You know, Chrysler in 1948 put power windows in their top-of-the-line Town and Country.
Right.
And Ford put their new technology for overhead valves and stuff into their Lincolns in the early 50s. The top technology has always gone to the leading car, but for some reason, in the electric car range, Detroit seems to have put their leading technology in the low-end models. So now you've got a car that's typically a $20,000 Chevrolet being sold for $40,000, or a Ford Focus, same thing.
Why? It doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense to me
It's
either.
odd, isn't it?
And it's odd because in the early days, the cost of cars, of new products, is high. If you look at the cost of a computer in 1983, you could have bought a PC for $10,000.
Right.
If you bought a cell phone in 1987, it would cost you $3,000 and you'd lug it around.
Right.
You bought an iPod in 2001, it was $600. It's all about maturing supply chains. And the electric car is competing against engine plants and transmission plants that have been overbuilt and been running for 100 years. There's lots of competition. They've got the price down.
Have they had to, has Detroit, people in Detroit who are used to making internal combustion machinery, have they had to marry with another culture? Is that uncomfortable for them? Is that odd for them?
I think it is. I think for a zebra to change its stripes from internal combustion engine to electric, it's a very big leap.
And John, isn't this the same problem they had when Obama was doing the bailouts and so on, when they were on their butt, that these are the companies that experienced in the past such extraordinary, unquestioning success? How could you even think about changing something?
Yeah.
It's like Federer and Nadal trying to change tennis strokes.
And that's what I was alluding to earlier. I think it's very hard for the existing management team to change. I think what it takes, and what really broke open electric cars in the auto industry in general was the presence, the coming of Tesla onto the scene. Because here was a viable startup. Some smart guys from Silicon Valley said, if you're looking to break into the automotive industry, it's got huge barriers to entry. There's a litany of entrepreneurs, the Bricklands, the DeLoreans, the Preston Tuckers. They've all blown their fortunes on trying to get into the industry. It's very expensive. You can't compete against the auto industry with the same type of product. Then it's just their brand and their marketing against your brand.
So you have to come up with a whole new baby.
You come up with something whole new. That was the opportunity of the electric car in the 2000s. It is, here's the opportunity to break into the auto industry with a totally new product, and the opportunity is to take market share away from everybody else.
Now, it seems to me if all of those folks can bring the initial cost down, we're going to see a ton more of these vehicles on the road.
Oh, yes. And actually, it's interesting. The Obama administration, I think a couple months ago, they have a number of initiatives to make the fuel efficiency. They want to get off oil.
Yes.
And because it's great for national security. And one of their prospects was to make electric cars cheaper than gasoline cars by 2020.
We'll see. John, thanks very much. Terrific stuff. Yeah. If you get to be really rich and famous, can I be your friend?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, John Stonier. Next week, another John, very different guy, John McKay, who was a cop, and now he runs a company called Defensive Tactics Institute. And John will talk about the downtown east side, about the Four Pillars system, and other, well, I would call them scourges, but we'll say other social things. Thanks for being with us, and once again, thanks to Shaw for having us here on Shaw Community Television, Cable 4. Good night.